Well, welcome everyone to Framing Projects for Success. My guest for today is Dale Gration from Perth in Australia, a very experienced project director, project manager, quality management individual, currently working as a principal consultant, providing project management and assurance work for owner organizations in the oil and gas industry. And Dale is also an experienced framing facilitator. So, Dale, thank you so much for being here today. And I am very grateful for our chat with you today.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity, and thanks for having me on. Yeah,
Well, let's start straight away with you, Dale. Tell us a little bit about what's your background and what do you do currently?
um, my background is largely oil and gas projects and in operational areas as well. I started with an affiliate of Exxon in Bass Strait. After almost 15 years there, I moved to Woodside, spent 12 years with them on various projects in their operations side. From there, I moved to INPEX on the Ecofus project, and after we gained final investment decision on that, I moved to Atlantic LNG in Trinidad, where I was Director of Projects and spent a bit over 4 years there. And since then, I've basically worked on contract for various other companies doing assurance and helping with project management systems and so forth. So that's basically where I've been for the last since 1976, and yeah, it's been a wonderful ride. I got into opportunity framing when I was at Woodside, and after a number of projects had overrun both on schedule and budget. Two Chevron secondees created something called OPREP, which was a leveraged off Chevron's chip dip management system. And that was my first exposure to a decision gate or toll gate process where opportunity framing was used at the beginning of each phase, or as you pass through one toll gate, you would frame the opportunity over again. And of course, at the end of each phase, there was a toll gate where assurance checks were carried out.
So, tell us a little bit more about that moment. What was specifically about framing that you saw that captured your attention and convinced you that that might be a valuable tool in project management in the oil and gas industry then? And just remind us, that was like early 2000?
Yeah, that would be right. It would be just about 2000, 2001, when OPREP was first rolled out to the organisation. So there were a number of us that were foundation OPREP facilitators, which the two Chevron chaps, Ian Binney and Clint French, were just excellent, well versed in the chip dip process at Chevron. Yeah, so what struck me was because it was first presented by the Woodside management as a new project management system, and having read it, for me, it struck me being very far removed from a project management system, was more about managing risk and understanding what the residual risk was. And it was driven by knowing what decisions you needed to make in the upcoming phase, and then performing the work underneath those decisions to make sure that you had done enough, but not too much, and not undercooked it, but done enough work to actually help with that decision being made. So, and yeah, the key, I mean, the three questions everybody already knows, which is where are we now, where do we want to be, and how are we going to get there? But it's the how are we going to get there, the roadmap, that is the real key to driving value out of the process.
I was also the OPREP advisor at one point for Woodside. So it brings memories, but I'm very curious about those early days. And tell us a little bit, what was that initial framing like? Like, how many days did it take? I understand that was like a workshop format with those 3 distinct questions. But tell us a little bit more about what sort of projects where utilize framing, what and how long did it take? Maybe you could give us examples. What was the outcome of framing? So few questions in that one big question.
So I think in the early days, because we had within Woodside, we had a developments group, and it got to a deliverable called the basis of design, which was then handed over to a project team to then take the basis of design through feed up to final investment decision. I think the quality sometimes of what was handed over to projects wasn't robust, so there were certain projects that we handed back to developments to go and work again. There were others, I think, if I look at Train 4, they were caught on the hop, they were already moving ahead, but they actually looked at their processes and then tried to map it to OPREP what they had done. And, if we look in hindsight at LNG Train 4 at Woodside, it's probably their most effective delivered train, and it was stick built, it wasn't modular. So I think it was a modified OPREP process, and that was because they'd already started running, they were in execute phase, but they did take a look back and, they'd put all the right, I guess, what we would call the OPREP value tools in place. And not all of them, the ones they did put in place definitely helped them with their success. TCEP was following Train 4, and that had the advantage of the not only the full OPREP process being applied, but 2 very experienced Chevron guys working on the project initially. Ian Binney left, and then Roy Thompson took over as the projects director. So I think TCEP, that was a very successful project, both ahead of schedule and under budget. So that's probably some of the successes. I think the workshops, people struggled initially, and because they weren't fully familiar with the process, and some of the facilitation was, look, you've got to put your trust in the process and you'll see the outcome. And I think some of the outcomes weren't as sharp or as focused as they could have been. And maybe it was the facilitators were more facilitators. They didn't have that operational or technical background at that point. But it's like most of these processes, the more it gets used, the better it becomes. I think Tony Brown took the process to Shell, and I think Shell really took it to another level there. And the Shell facilitators I found over the years were excellent. They sharpened the workshops up. The workshops, duration-wise, some of them were going 3 days, and it was just too long. So, but I think the longest that I've attended was a major offshore compression project that we did in Trinidad, and that was, I'd say, a day and 3/4, 2 full days, you might as well call it, to really. But again, people that hadn't been exposed to the process before, and a lot of BP people who attended were very impressed with the process and what it delivered at the end of the day. Of course, once you've got the roadmap, then it's up to the project team to actually steward themselves, to deliver the work, to support the decisions they're making in the timeline that they think they can they identify as being able to be done.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
no good doing a workshop and having outputs that then sit on a bookshelf somewhere and are never looked at again until you get to the assurance check. So
Yeah, so that was a great recap of what happened in those early days. And I like that when you say, well, they used to have 3 days, sometimes 2 days, workshops. Well, if you could describe outcomes out of those 2 days conversation, Dale, especially maybe to someone who's really unfamiliar with opportunity framing workshop, like what would you say? What are the key outcomes that people get, and maybe what are the key outcomes that the project sponsor gets? Because sometimes they like different audience, and they might be looking for different things.
I guess if you're a project sponsor or the business unit decision maker, what you're really looking for is understanding whether the project, whatever it is ready to proceed through the toll gate when it comes to the assurance check. But out of the framing workshop, what they get as they head towards that toll gate is a very good understanding of what the risks are. So I think and what the issues are, and I think that's important to differentiate. So when you're in a framing workshop, we use definitions, what a risk is, what an issue is, and what an uncertainty is. And so categorising those, you don't end up with a whole bunch of issues in your risk register. I mean, issues have happened, they're there now, whereas a risk has a probability of occurring or not. Whereas an issue is 100% probability it's occurred and a decision needs to be made, so somebody needs to do something. So when the framing workshops, the outputs come out, you get if it's facilitated right, you get a very good understanding of what the key risks are and whether they need to be managed in the upcoming phase or whether it's later on. The issues, and what needs to be done about the issues, what decisions need to be made. The other thing that, roadmap aside, I think the stakeholder management plan, and that was something in the early days I think we were quite weak on at Woodside. So whether they've got power and support or some other variable on your, usually it's a 2x2 Boston matrix. The beauty of a well-developed stakeholder management plan, it says, here's somebody who holds a lot of power, but they don't support the project. You need to have a plan to move them into supporting the project. So a stakeholder management plan isn't just putting stakeholders into boxes. It's what you do with that to then say, okay, we really need to move these, and it could be JVs, it could be a government department. We really need to move these people into a more supportive box. So I think the stakeholder management plan, and often that's an area where the project sponsor can also help the project by engaging with those sort of senior stakeholders to help move the project forward. They're probably what I'd say are the understanding issues, understanding the risks, understanding who the stakeholders are, and it's probably about it. And then it's that ongoing interaction with the team, and look, using the roadmap to actually start thinking about when you engage with the project team. You don't want a project sponsor breathing down your back all the time, but he should know that you should have done enough work to come to this decision. And it's a two-way engagement. The project team should be keeping him informed. But I think with the roadmap, again, it's, he doesn't have to get into detailed Gantt charts that you get out of all the time out of a project. It's really keeping your eye on the ball at are they progressing far enough? Have they done enough work for that next key decision that's due?
Whole framing being introduced in early 2000 to Woodside, and obviously you saw how the process was evolving, right, from maybe 3 days down to like 1 and 2 days. But then you left Woodside and you went to other companies. I'm really interested to you to tell us, so how did you manage to introduce this process to other companies that never had that before? Tell us a little bit about that moment. What problems did you see that occurred for you in your mind? Framing can solve this. And then how did you go about implementing this with other companies?
So at Impex, when I joined as development planning manager. So it was my role to put something akin to chip deck or OPREC in place. And it was strongly supported by the deputy managing director of the project, who was a Shell guy, ex-Shell guy. So he knew the process. He was already a disciple. So, and what we tried to do was make it match the company culture. It was a Japanese company, Japanese led. So we actually went to Tokyo and presented to the Impex board on what it would look like, how it, at a high level, what the principles were, and got the board's support as well. So, but the real test came in probably the first element of the project. It was a very large supply base, which was it was modelled on another operator's approach, which was single use. So only that operator used it. Very large, all singing, all dancing supply base, navigation channels. And it had never been tested through framing or any concept development. So we actually took that and we framed it as if we were starting again. And what came out of that framing was basically a decision to recycle. I mean, they were already in design, but we shut it down and we went back to concept select stage and took it through the normal development process, came up with about 12 options, the usual divergent thinking, and then converged down to a preferred concept. And that preferred concept wasn't a single-use supply base in Western Australia. It ended up a multi-user supply base in Darwin. So that was one example of where the process really it saved a lot of capex. Really added value to the project. One of the other areas we looked at was the offshore scopes, which were largely being managed by Total, the joint venture partner in Icofus. And quite honestly, I think they'd done a really good job, but what we identified out of that framing workshop was they could actually start pipelaying 6 months earlier than what they planned. So that was, just another, opportunity that came out of the framing workshop. So, there was strong support from senior management and the board at Impex, the Japanese board, to put that in place. At Atlantic LNG, they actually had a process that was very similar to what I'd seen at Shell and Chevron and Woodside, and it was called the Atlantic Value Process. So it was a tollgate process, but it wasn't being implemented. So at Atlantic, it was about, and what was happening there was in the, because it's an operating LNG plant, lots of brownfield projects, but the solutions were being decided by basically engineering teams without going through concept select, any sort of framing, any sort of assurance checks, and the project performance was average at best. So we set about using the Atlantic value process. We modified it. Opportunity framing became the norm, and the value there was in the collaboration with other disciplines, because projects would just come up with a solution that was in many cases just hardware focused and leave everybody else trailing behind, deliver a project, and then environment would come along and say, oh, well, we needed to go to the government to get, certain conditions fulfilled, and they were left out of the loop. So when we started enforcing the discipline of opportunity framing in the larger Atlantic value process, which included assurance checks and engaging with the shareholders as part of those assurance checks, we got far better engagement, we got far better value created. And sometimes the solution isn't a hardware project. Sometimes the solution is a commercial solution, or you don't end up doing the project at all. That's even a better solution. You get the same value, but you don't even do the project. So we had a number of instances where we were able to create value by going through opportunity framing, but it wasn't doing a project. It was getting whoever was supplying the gas to clean up the gas before it hit the plant. And so instead of building a whole bunch of hardware and other equipment to clean up the gas after it hit the plant, get it done offshore where it should have been done in the first place. So there's, again, it's no good having a process if it's sitting on the shelf and it's not being effectively used. And I think it helped with certainly the biggest project we did there, which was an onshore compression project. And the way we approached it was very different to what was envisaged by the shareholders. But opportunity framing gave them the chance to listen to all of the stakeholders and actually hear what they were saying was the best way to deliver the project, and actually ending up supporting us to do that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I hear you saying that to really introduce opportunity framing based on what you've done this for other oil and gas companies. So you found a champion, you were able to articulate the process and the principles, and then you were able to find opportunities that you can actually frame that are either down in develop phase or sort of sitting and waiting for a decision to be made. And then you kind of went project by project to sort of prove the concept of framing. And how would you approach this situation if you went outside of oil and gas industry? Let's say a manufacturing industry that is unfamiliar with our toll gates, with phases and gates. So what they typically do, they do project initiation when they define what the project is about, engage with stakeholders, confirm the solution, and then just move to the next stage. And it's almost like that first phase is our assess and concept. So would you first talk to them about phases and gates process, or would you talk to them about framing? Like, how would you approach company outside of the oil and gas space?
I don't think I'd approach it that much differently. What I've found is once you have I'll use Atlantic as an example. The first framing workshop we ran, the number of people that came up to us, and there was myself and one other guy there that were the facilitators. And these were stakeholders that had never been engaged, operations, people like that, never been engaged in this sort of workshop before. And they became supporters of, what projects were doing in that space. They understood it, because that's the thing, once you've experienced it and you get that sort of outcome, it's amazing how people convert to the process. And at Atlantic, I had probably the advantage of being there for 3 months before I became director. The incumbent director was there and I was designated director. So I got a chance to sit and watch, and my first decision when I became director was to shut down everything that wasn't in execute phase and have the lot reframed. And after you do that once and people understand, then you get a critical mass of people who want to do more of that. And if I had my time over again, I would have shut down the projects that were in execute phase as well, because they became the problem children as we move forward. So I think the key for me is that if you can find the right sponsor within whatever other industry it is, and they understand the value that it can provide to them, then I think the people that are involved in the workshops, for the most part, they sort of grasp what's happening fairly quickly with good facilitation, and from there the value is recognised. So I've done some work in the power industry as well, and again, the processes are there. They're very similar to what's used in oil and gas. It's about people having the discipline to properly apply them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that answers your question or not, but yeah, for me, it's about one, having the right sponsor who's going to support you within the rest of the business, and then getting the right people along to the workshops. And I think often the grounding presentation will give you a flavour of what people feel in the room, and I always find that's the key start to the day, especially when you say, okay, we finished the grounding presentation, now bring your stickies up and put them on the wall. And I'm old school that way. I love stickies and post-its, and and just even there's a discipline to using post-its. Make sure they're right on the non-side. Put your initials on it, and just a single issue on each post-it, and from there that gives you just such rich material to begin working with. And at the end of the workshop, you've always got to come back to them. Have you closed these out, all of these issues, or were they risks? Have you categorised them right? Is somebody doing something about this? And if they're not, then you've got to, whatever your output is, you've got to say somebody needs to deal with this. That's it. I guess from my perspective, it can apply to any industry. And as I say, sometimes out of these framing workshops, there's a commercial solution that comes out rather than a hardware solution.
Yeah. So this is interesting, especially that you are someone, Dale, that really knows the nitty and gritty of projects, and especially when it comes to project development, which is where we're looking for the right solution to the right problem, strictly speaking. What was your role in those framing workshops? I'm particularly interested in how do you also, as an expert in your field, maybe to some extent decision maker in some situations, how did you manage the challenge of being a facilitator who is neutral to the outcome, and at the same time really being familiar with the process? How did you manage this challenge?
I think when you're facilitating, you're there to assist the group, and despite your technical knowledge or your experience, you've really got to let the group, you're there to help them understand the process. So you remain process focused, this is the process we're going through. The outcome will be what the outcome is at the end of the day. If you're really worried about something, then you can take an offline discussion with whoever's there that can best explain the issue. But I mean, that's rare. And for my part, it's if you go in to facilitate, if you're focusing on something else, trying to be part of the workshop, very hard to wear two hats. And and often, you can have two solutions equally as good as each other. You just got to run with the process. As soon as you try to step into it, you lose sight of where you're going with the process. You start to drive towards a solution that might be your preference. You do get an opportunity, I guess, in setting up the statement of success to talk with the business unit leader and understand that, and maybe query them on their views. But for me, once you're involved in a framing workshop, you're there to facilitate, not there to work group.
And from your experiences, Dale, especially that you run this process for a number of companies, who do you think are the right people in the workshop? And also whether you invite project sponsors or other key decision makers into the workshop. Tell us a little bit about who would you normally invite to the framing workshop?
Well, I think if for nothing else, the project sponsor or the business unit director, whoever the decision maker is, they should be there for at least the grounding session, because I think sometimes issues come out in the grounding session that they might be best placed to give their perspective on to the rest of the work group. And sometimes that could be a surprise to the rest of the work group. They could bring something to the table that the work group weren't aware of. Do they have to be there for the whole workshop? I would say it's not necessary. In fact, there might be some advantage in them not being there once you get in, using the value tools and so forth. And as far as the right people there, I think it's really, if you've got a project director or a project manager, you've got to sit down with him and say who's coming. And this is all part of the pre-work. And also actually question them. You might need legal there for some specific reason. I think anybody that can talk to the environmental requirements must be there. And yet they, in the early days, were probably the one that was most often left out, unless they had an environmental advisor on the project. But so I think the project managers got to look far and wide. I mean, if it's the start of the define stage or develop stage, so that feed, I think it's always handy to have somebody from developments in there who's handed over the BOD or the preliminary BOD to the project to actually answer those sort of queries, because often they have knowledge that the project doesn't have. So, I think it's different for each project. I mean, commercial people might be required. I think there's no cookie cutter recipe to it. You've got to look each time. and at each phase and say, who do we need here for this one? And it may not be the same people every time, even on a single project.
Yeah, true. So really the key is, like you mentioned, the right preparation and speaking with the sponsor before the workshop and with the development manager or project manager to identify the right functions, the right roles, and then invite them. And that might change as you move from one phase to the next. You mentioned something really interesting, Dale. You said you match the framing process to the company culture. You said that specifically when you were introducing framing to Arctic LNG, and I love that. I just want to know from your experiences, how does framing can really help and be introduced to companies where there is a lot more top down approach, where functions are not talking to each other, where they are unfamiliar with workshops, and in fact they never worked with a facilitator before, and they probably have a lot of fear to invite someone into those project planning discussions, right? And probably have a lot of fear to get anyone to understand the real team dynamic. How would you sell framing workshop?
I don't know that I have a real answer for that. I think you start with, you really need somebody within the senior management or the executive who likes the case for change and says that we should really do this. And that's common to most change management processes. And then he's got to, with the right support, go out and engage with the other functions and the key people in those functions that he knows he can get support from. And I think you need that sort of, if it's a top-down organisation, then that's where it's got to come from initially. And, and I think, as I said before, once you get people involved in the workshop and in the process, you'll find that they probably not only accept, but will demand more of it going forward. They will recognise the value. We've had one workshop probably like that, which was with the Tokyo headquarters when we were doing greenhouse gas management, and totally unfamiliar with opportunity framing and what we were doing and taking them through it. But we, once a couple of the younger environmental scientists or engineers understood what was happening, they excused themselves, they went out and they grabbed their directors and brought them back and had them sit in for the workshop. And it was, at the end of the day, our greenhouse gas general manager and our deputy director, who were both part of the workshop, not facilitating, had myself and somebody else doing that. They were really happy with the outcome, but even getting that group of people to come and stand up around a board with stickies on it was very challenging. It's something that they weren't used to. And you just have to persevere and encourage. And it's in that sort of environment, very different culture to even the Perth office. And at the end of the day, getting a good result out of it, then you end up with a number of converts within the head office who understand the process and see the value in it. And I think their sustainability and greenhouse gas management plans are just world class now with what they're trying to do. So it was nice to be a small stepping stone on that journey for them. Yeah.
That is amazing. So, and I love that example, which I can remind myself when I had to ask Vice President, can you please pick up the post-it notes and write down issues, questions, and concerns? And when you're ready, post it on the wall. And And even in Australia, I remember that was something on my mind, that I was sitting for a day thinking, how am I going to do this, right? And because we just so used to doing stuff for others, especially for vice presidents. But obviously, in this situation, you have to let people participate fully in the workshop. And so part of it is really have to take yourself away and treat everyone as equal, right? In this workshop, no matter what their role is.
And it's probably generational as well. I've been in one workshop and full of MBAs and explained the post-it process and what we expected and how to write, single issue and put it down. And as we're going through the grounding presentation, I'm watching, and probably 3/4 of them are putting it all on their laptop. It came time to post it, and they said, well, it's here. So I explained the rules. Now you're going to have to transfer it. And again, it's until you see the process and then you get them up and you're looking at the post-its and who said what and so forth, and categorizing them into streams and so forth. I think then the understanding, the comprehension of the value of doing that and not having it just on your own private laptop and not being able to, and I guess they're so used to putting stuff on laptops and then sharing it across a table, but getting people up in close proximity and actually questioning each issue or whatever the post-it is, and having them explain it. I think that was new, and these were sort of mid-20-year-old MBAs. And so that was, there's always challenges in the workshops, and you just have to be flexible enough to find a way of dealing with them.
Yeah. So has framing got an opportunity or potential to impact the culture? And if yes, give me an example.
I think the example I gave about greenhouse gas management in Tokyo is probably the best one. And where you see a room full of people sitting at tables and trying to engage, and you're not only engaging with them, you're trying to teach them the process at the same time, and getting them to use post-its, even getting them out of their seats and standing up around a board to discuss it and talk about it was probably one of the hardest framing workshops that I've been involved in. But, again, by the end of the second day, when we wrapped this up, I think the individuals, I don't know culturally if they do it in other workshops, but I think they felt comfortable in this framing workshop, and probably a couple of Anglo-Saxons running it makes it a bit easier for them. But I think and certainly the process as far as the joint venture partner Total was concerned, they use similar process, but they're still probably very engineering, hardware driven. So doing workshops that looked at phase 2 developments of this project, and we hadn't even started phase 1, but we were looking at what if the reservoir outcomes were less than P50. What do you have to do to make sure you keep the trains full? So having that sort of workshop was probably something different for them. And again, it was framing, grounding presentations. This is where we are now, but what if? What are the decisions we need to make, and when do we need to make them to make sure that we could keep the trains full? So each workshop is different drivers, everybody thinks of it as something you apply to a specific phase of a project. But in actual fact, you can look at opportunities within a project and have to use it as well. And so when you present back, you're saying, okay, if this is the outcome, then you need to be prepared to place orders for long leads at this point. And, you know, next decision will be on drilling rigs. Do you keep one going all the way through phase one and then into phase two? Where's your cut-off points? So it's a really powerful tool. And once you understand what it is that you're, not necessarily a problem, but what you're trying to comprehend the various outcomes. Where do you need to make decisions? What are those decisions? When do you need to make them? Yeah, it's more powerful than just looking at a project phase. It's proactive management of the risk register, if the risk is large enough. And and that's where opportunity framing helps people again to understand, okay, it hasn't happened, but I've got these steps along the way where I'll get more information. And each time I get another piece of information, what does that mean to the decisions I have to make?
Yeah.
So it's a roadmap to assist the decision makers understand, as they get more information, can they just sit back and say, okay, I'm comfortable now, I don't need to make this decision now. And then the next time they get another piece of information, this doesn't look as good as we thought. Okay, we need to start setting up purchase orders for long lead with a cancellation clause in it for something. You know, it's that sort of proactive thinking. So it's not part of the normal project delivery, but it's saying, if I don't get the reservoir outcome that we thought we were going to get at a P50, what do I do to make sure that we keep the gas flowing and keep the trains full?
What's the future of framing, Dale? What do you think is the future of framing? How could we sell it to the world?
It's a good question, because in the oil and gas industry, we seem to be making the same mistakes over again. And, you know, that concerns regarding quality in the industry. It seems like we're learning the same lessons over again. Process safety. Everybody's focused on process safety, and yet we still keep having major accident events across the industry. So, and framing, I mean, the Atlantic value process had all of the key elements of that sort of toll gate process, including opportunity framing, assurance checks. But if people don't use it, I think that's probably my biggest concern, that the industry keeps moving ahead, and that a lot of the good tools, I mean, the great tools like opportunity framing that we have, get left behind, and people go back to the old way of doing things. I know what the solution is, we'll just proceed with the solution, and become very hardware focused rather than more holistic, because there's a lot more solutions out there than just hardware. So yeah, I have concerns that maybe both oil and gas and other industries that use opportunity framing, leave it behind. And I think, it's not just in Australia, it's globally. So, and yet it's such a powerful tool when it's used properly. So, I don't know what the future is. but I am concerned.
Mm, mm. I hear you. And when I moved to the US from Australia, I was actually surprised. There isn't many companies I know, including those small LNG companies. They really not looking out enough, trying to grab those best practices from the past to apply them. Because they're a lot smaller, they can be a lot more agile, they can introduce a lot more practices faster, and especially they usually employ a lot of experienced people who somehow heard about strong gates, phases and gates, opportunity framing workshops, that kind of stuff. So it's definitely a concern. It's a valid concern. What I also love what you mentioned is the examples that you gave, that if you apply framing consistently across all of your opportunities in this early phase, you might end up not having that many projects, right? Because you can disqualify so much stuff and you can really focus on high value projects, which is
Yeah.
really the focus right now with the limited access to the right resources and talents. More and more companies are focusing on doing less and getting more. So your example, I guess it can really resonate with a lot of companies, a lot of executives right now. How can we disqualify those long hanging fruits that don't really give any value? Okay, if it's a compliance project, okay, if it's about reputation, but let's be real about the value proposition before we move into execution, where we spend most of our funding. So, Dale, is there anything else that you would love to share with us about framing that we maybe haven't covered yet?
I don't think so, but I think your comment on the value, I always remember the bird's beak diagram from OPREP, which shows, most of the value is created in the first two stages. And from there, whether you execute it badly or not, you still will get the greater majority of the value. But if it has low value, it doesn't matter how well you execute it or how poorly, it's still going to be, a dog of a project because it didn't have that intrinsic value in the first place. So I think for me, I guess opportunity framing is really helping people achieve that value. But if it hasn't been created in the first place in those early stages, then opportunity framing won't help you in that sense. Might help you understand that it is a poor value project, but it certainly won't help you increase the value.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Dale. It was such a pleasure chatting with you about framing. I love that discussion.